The morning of November 24th started out as so many mornings had been. I went to the gym on the lot, got dressed, went up to my office.
I got a call from our head of publicity who said, the internet's down. I said, great. Then she said, no, it's like really down.
I heard a knock, and the person knocking was a fellow who really oversaw the information technology. He said with a degree of urgency in his voice, Sheraton, please, come look at this. On the screen of his computer was this devil-horned skeletal figure. My initial reaction was that this was some sort of prank. He said, it's not only on my computer.
I spoke to a Sony executive who tonight is giving new details of the scope of this attack, and it has been massive.
So I went to the office, and what I saw, and my office was back in the corner on the 3rd floor, were people literally just standing outside their offices, not sure what to do. The very worst of it was when this, kind of skull and crossbones came up, and basically people were told, if you didn't cooperate with us, we're going to come after you.
Sony Pictures Entertainment was under attack, and a little movie may have been the cause.
Hello, North Korea!
The comedy movie, The Interview, that Sony had produced about assassinating Kim Jong-un, which of course is the worst thing that you could do. It was an insult. And of course, one of the prime rules in North Korea is you don't insult the regime. You don't insult Kim Jong-un.
When the interview was first being promoted, and it was being rather well received, I remember seeing a trailer in a theater and thinking that looks really funny. I also remember thinking, wow, they're actually using the North Korean ruler's name, and that's pretty gutsy. I remember shortly thereafter it became clear that the North Korean regime was taking offense at this.
Sony Pictures Hollywood offices were the most affected. By the time the malicious virus spread, 70% of their computer network would be destroyed. Then the data dumps began. Emails and sensitive personal information, thought secure and private, released for the world to see.
It's just a juggling act between balancing, getting the work done, you had to do at work, and then making sure in your personal life with all your information, social security number, passport, information being leaked out, that you weren't violated that way. I remember my sister sitting at her desk one day crying because, someone was trying to get her bank account. Sony wasn't hacked, people were hacked. And that was the most devastating part of it. You make a movie that's meant to be funny, that you're gonna have something like this happen? I don't know who predicts that.
The film's release came at a time of great vulnerability for Kim Jong-un. In 2014, North Korea's young leader was still proving himself. Just 3 years since his father's death, he needed to cement his role as supreme leader, earn loyalty with military leadership, and buy allegiance from Pyongyang elites. Insulting the regime, even in satire, does not fit their narrative.
The essence of the North Korean government is the maintenance of the Kim family in power. The whole mythology of the government is that there is this family, it's this mythological bloodline, everything is dependent on that.
The first, I would say, 4 to 6 weeks of the hack were like a very long, lasting hurricane. There was really no escaping this story. And with the advent of social media, 24-hour news networks, everywhere you would go, if you caught a screen, there was that Sony water tower with a chyron under it saying, new fallout from Sony hack.
all of our deals were released. So deals we had with different networks were available for people to look at it. It's one part of it. People's salaries were released. So as you can imagine, people start looking at what so-and-so makes, and that caused issues.
The Sony invasion would come to symbolize a turning point in North Korea's criminal cyber capability. It sent a clear message that they could and would terrorize whenever and whomever they want.
The hardest part for me was literally like waking up every day. Like my alarm clock was my phone. So I get up early and I cringed, like what was going to be on that, what emails would be released today. And when your emails to your son or your wife or children or colleagues that were, maybe it said stuff that wasn't so flattering to others, it'd deal with all that.
I don't believe that the Sony team was any more cavalier or loose than other executives might be. I think that's a hallmark of working at the highest levels of the entertainment industry. Sony's really no different. It's just that Sony got caught.
It was not just the first time that the United States woke up and realized that North Korea was capable enough to be able to execute an attack and operation of this scale, but it was three things put together. The cyber operation, the intimidation campaign, and the destruction that I think combined made people really realize North Korea had come so far and that we were really looking at an actual adversary, right? And not just a nuisance anymore.
They were preparing for some kind of activity for some time because they conducted phishing attacks to really gain access to the Sony network. But North Korea was much more sophisticated than that, and so they were sending, spoofing emails. They thought they were from people they knew. They click on a link, and that gives them access. And so they just got to get through one time.
Then North Korea posted an open letter, threatening theaters with 9/11-style terror attacks.
The fact that it was North Korea, obviously the connection to the film, the interview, was there. It seemed like a hyper overreaction to something. So I guess in hindsight, I'm not surprised that a sense of humor is something that's sorely lacking there.
From what I've been told, it was the largest attack on a U.S. corporation in history. And I remember talking to a government official, they said, it may be the first, the biggest, it won't be the last.
It has the marks of a terrorist attack. And yes, they attacked us without putting a soldier on the ground. This is, I think, the complexity of cyber is how do you respond to that? If they fired a missile, dropped a bomb, if they killed a soldier or killed a person, we might respond, everybody might expect a response in a similar way. But cyber, I think we're still figuring out how to do that.
The death of Kim Jong-il and the succession of his son, Kim Jong-un, marked a critical point in North Korea's aggressive tactics toward the outside world. It was December 2011, and journalist Jean H. Lee was tasked with opening the first Associated Press office in the capital, Pyongyang. En route to her new post, she learned of Kim Jong-il's death.
We arrived in North Korea to a country that was in mourning. I was there for the entire transition and succession period, the time when Kim Jong-un was being groomed to become the next leader, and also the time that the North Koreans were being groomed to prepare for his leadership. It's been absolutely fascinating to see a country in transition. How, when you are a country that poor, do you tell your people that this young man that none of them knew was going to take over? And so understanding how they paved the way for that to happen and what he had to do to win the people's trust and loyalty and gain legitimacy as this young man inheriting power has been very, I think, essential to understanding what's happening in North Korea today.
It was a very tense period for North Korea. You had Kim Jong-un, who was not even 30 years old when his father died in 2011. In North Korean culture, you have to be 30 years old to even be considered a man. His father, Kim Jong-il, had had 30 years in the system before Kim Il-sung died in 1994. So he had a lot of experience, developed the relationships, had the skills to run the regime.
Kim Jong-un, groomed as heir apparent, makes his debut in 2010, and the dynastic myth-making machine was put into action.
He was very much in the public eye at his father's side, paving the way for his reign. And a lot of the messaging that we were getting on the ground was he's young, he's modern, he supports science and technology, he's going to do everything his father and his grandfather did, but in a modern way. And so that kind of language and messaging was very, very clear. And it's been very consistent throughout his leadership.
There are two things you need to be able to do to be able to consolidate power in a place like North Korea. You need to develop relationships, and you need to be educated into how to manipulate the levers of power.
Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-un's grandfather, was the first leader of North Korea. He established the levers of power by conducting throughout the 1950s a reign of terror upon anyone perceived as a political threat, including torture, killings, and banishment to Stalinist labor camps. It became a family tradition.
So we started to see lots of purges going on within the regime. They were primarily of the military, to basically bring the military out of the military first policy of the Kim Jong-il era into the Kim Jong-un era, which would focus more on the economy and the party and the people.
Experts believe that over 400 were purged by Kim Jong-un.
North Korea is a police state on steroids. I mean, it makes the Stalinist police state look like a walk in the park. There is a joke that goes around Pyongyang that if you have 3 people sitting down to a table to have a drink, at least one of those people is an informant. And it's true, everybody is watching everybody. You have individuals that are watching individuals, you have institutions that are watching institutions.
As Kim's court carries out a brutal suppression, he publicly projects an image of a modern leader for a modern nation.
The younger generation, these are his peers. He's a young man in his 30s. If he wants to rule until the ripe old age of 80-something, like his grandfather or his father who reached the late 70s, he's going to need the support of this younger generation. So much of the strategy has been around how do we appeal to this younger generation? Science and technology has been a huge part of that. They could also inspire and corral their younger generation by enticing them with computers. So look, this is something where you don't have to go out into the field in the dead of winter, freezing to death. You could actually sit in a computer lab at a computer and be patriotic that way, serve your country that way. That was the messaging that was very clear. It's still very clear in their TV dramas, in their documentaries, that they're trying to sell the image of a computer scientist as a way to serve your country, as a way to defend your country.
The majority of cyber operations that North Korea conducted up until about 2013 and 2014 were of the disruptive, destructive, chaos-causing type, right? Sony attack is one of them. After the Sony attack, there is a change, there's a shift. There's always been an underlying intention on North Korea's part to use cyber operations to for traditional espionage, right? Attack governments, steal information, right? So that existed then and it still exists today. But in 2015, the bite of sanctions, right, and the isolation, specifically the financial isolation, really began to take hold. And at that time, it appears that Kim Jong-un and his leadership sort of began to realize the opportunities on the internet that they could exploit.
The Kims have never shied away from skirting decades-old and increasing economic sanctions by conducting illicit activities, bringing in much-needed hard currency. The regime took action to make cyber profitable by grooming an army of criminal computer scientists.
North Koreans are very good at research, at scoping out their potential targets, at investigating them, spending the time, the months to figure out what the computer systems look like, where the vulnerabilities are. Doing good homework is the basis for a successful cyber operation. It's a real-time, responsive operation. People are at the keyboards with their team around them, and if one exploit for vulnerability doesn't work, then they have to try another one. And so the ability to move within a network, accomplish your goal quickly and speedily as possible, and get out. So North Korea has all of these aspects, that one could say are sophisticated.
Armies of hackers sent to live abroad, many in China, begin targeting the SWIFT system, the global standard for bank-to-bank money transfers.
What they have been able to do is to use cyber for an economic gain. And this means transferring funds illicitly within banks by getting access to the SWIFT accounts, which then allows them to then manipulate money within banks. We saw this within the Bank of Bangladesh, in which they stole about $81 million. They transferred that money to the Federal Reserve Bank in New York and then forwarded it on to the Bank of Philippines. And then they were able to launder it through a variety of banking accounts and casino accounts. And so they have been very adept at being able to do this.
They successfully stole the $81 million, but it is believed that multiple spelling errors kept the hackers from getting $1 billion through the Federal Reserve.
That is a real threat to the U.S. financial system, and we really should respond to those kind of threats and activities very strongly. And in this case, we didn't. And this is always the problem with the North, is that they get away with everything, and no one ever responds because everybody's afraid of the catastrophic response from the North.
This is a revolutionary culture. This is a culture that comes out of a guerrilla movement that it was established and really kind of grew up in the 1930s and 40s, fighting against Japan. A lot of things that they needed to do, were sleight of hand, and for being able to survive in the world.
Established after World War II, when the Korean Peninsula was arbitrarily divided at the 38th parallel, the Communist North was born out of the rubble left in the wake of the Korean War, which was Kim Il-sung's failed attempt to reunify one nation. The two Koreas have faced periods of both hostility and peace, but both nations eye one another with measured distrust. North Korea has an estimated 14,000 artillery pieces capable of reaching the South's capital Seoul, maintaining a constant threat.
North Korea is always looking for ways to remind the South Koreans about them. Remember, don't forget about us. Because I think that is a big concern of North Koreans. They're very concerned that their rich brothers across the border have left them behind, that they are too wrapped up in their wealth. But also they understand that their nearest neighbors, South Korea, this is a country that is perhaps one of the most digitally savvy, most dependent on technology in the world, and that they always have that as their trump card.
It is estimated that the North attempts 1.5 million cyber attacks on South Korea every day, just to disrupt routine life.
It's a staggering number, but I think that's really the essence of cyber, just like terrorism. You know, you have to keep trying to penetrate, you know, and of course, the problem with defending against that is you've got to be good and you got to be right 100% of the time. They just got to get through one time.
It's a way to remind South Koreans, we may be poor, but we have the ability, the capability to completely paralyze your life. And I've had this experience. I got a news alert on my phone that there had been a cyber attack that paralyzed the banking system. Your mind starts to whir. Everything could come down in a flash.
The attacks, while they were bad, they were not catastrophic. But of course, if they took down the infrastructure in the South or created a nuclear power accident, you know, one of the 23 nuclear power plants in South Korea, that would probably cause a catastrophic response. North Korea developed this infrastructure and this knowledge base, and they continue to evolve. And of course, now I think they're at a point where they can conduct cyber activities with impunity. North Korea is a poker player that has done pretty damn well with a pair of twos. It feeds into their blackmail diplomacy. They demonstrate their capabilities, and it gives them leverage. I have sometimes said the South is the ostrich kingdom, and they've got their heads buried in the sand. And I think that you know, there's a psychology that you know, we've lived with this threat for so long, we can deal with it. We don't want to upset the North.
The culture really gets validated again and again. If the world is against you and is going to prevent you from engaging in economic activity in a above-board manner, then you will figure out very sophisticated ways, illicit ways, in order to secure funding or to engage in economic practice.
When its main benefactor, the Soviet Union, fell, North Korea's economy collapsed. With that came an increased need for cash and goods to keep the military culture afloat. And most crucially, keep the elites of Pyongyang allied with the Kims. Historically, predating cyber technology, the North has conducted trade, legal and illegal, within the borders of allied nations. But its relationship with China has always been the most complex. China has been a longtime ally in the region and a historic enabler for decades.
China's not turning a blind eye to North Korean illegal behavior, including that behavior that is happening inside of China. But because China has made a strategic decision that they would rather have the North Korean regime there than not there, they are forced to accept a certain amount of illegal activity.
The nations share a porous 880-mile border and are a strategic economic partner in the region.
Chinese and North Korean officials love to talk about the relationship as close as lips and teeth. And Beijing, out of a sense of long buried responsibility, out of a sense of, to a small degree, communist fealty, but also out of a sense of not wanting to embarrass itself and not wanting to have to pick up the pieces if or when North Korea collapses, helps keep the country alive.
I use the analogy that North Korea is a drowning swimmer out there, and China will throw out the life ring and allow them to keep their head above water, but they won't pull them in. The Chinese government, or the Chinese Communist Party more specifically, you know, they have 3 no's. No war on the peninsula, no regime collapse or instability, and no nuclear weapons. So China's a pretty good baseball team because they're batting .600. But really, no war and no instability are really the watchwords and the guiding principle for the Chinese communists.
So long as North Korea stays in its lane, they are welcome to do business in China. Trading offices, acting on behalf of the regime, conduct both legal and illegal business through what is called Office 39. What John Park calls North Korea Incorporated.
North Korea Incorporated is a network of elite state trading companies that does business on behalf of the regime. But they've innovated and grew and made into a very sophisticated network, a structure that started around the mid-1980s. And this was a period of Jang Song-taek. This is the former uncle of the current leader, Kim Jong-un. He was the one who set up these state trading companies. He's the one who learned as some of these state trading companies initially failed, but eventually refined them and built into the structure of the regime this apparatus that is quite formidable, very useful for the evasion of sanctions, but also in just doing plain business on behalf of the regime. He was considered a rainmaker, the Midas touch in the North Korean regime. So I think it's important to view North Korea for what it is. It is a 1%, 99% phenomenon. North Korea, Inc. is really the story about the 1%. And if you zero in on the 1%, they are mobile. They're embedded in foreign countries, and particularly neighboring countries like China. The 1% is essentially an extension of the Kim family.
Uncle Jang personified the 1%. He brought in billions of dollars for the regime through business activities within China. His power base grew, which would lead to his downfall.
The relationship between Chairman Kim and his uncle, in hindsight, is one of the early crises that Chairman Kim faces. The rumor mill among the defector community is that Uncle Jang started to siphon resources away from Kim family coffers, essentially stealing from the Kim family.
The procurement and trade operations, the trust and relationship Uncle Jang established within China was the jewel in the Kim family criminal crown.
While Kim Jong-un recognized that he needed the expertise, the benefit of what Jang Song-taek had, the threat of any other power base in North Korea was too great to be tolerated.
The uncle, according to the North Korean news agency, has now been executed. He was purged, stripped of all his posts just a few days ago. The alleged crime is what it always is in the North Korean regime, disloyalty to the regime.
During his New Year's address, Chairman Kim proclaimed, "We took the resolute measure of removing the factionalist filth lurking in the party."
The message was quite clear, that for those who are in North Korea Incorporated, in the business of making money and procuring on behalf of the regime, you are being watched. You cannot get away with these type of crimes against the family.
We considered him to be the second most powerful figure in North Korea. So it did send a huge message to that entire community. It also triggered a series of purges. People who were connected to him, their lives were in danger.
The execution sent a chilling wave throughout the world and contradicted the impression Kim Jong-un was trying to project. The global community didn't know what else he was capable of doing.
North Korea Incorporated looks more resilient than it was before. And with the removal of Uncle Jang, we don't quite know who the exact individual is, but the management of North Korea Incorporated seems to be more effective, more efficient, more productive. And so that's the element of the resiliency of the network, I think, that Uncle Jang built, in the sense that in the end, he turned out to be replaceable.
It was shortly after Uncle John's execution that Sony Pictures Entertainment computers were attacked. Within weeks, the North Koreans made public scripts, unreleased films, and contracts with big-name stars.
Eventually, it was all dumped on WikiLeaks. And when it became searchable information, I was like, oh, great, you know. Just when you thought it was over.
It was sort of being the center of a circular firing squad. The entire scenario made it very clear that Sony was out hanging at the end of a branch alone.
The dirty laundry of Hollywood's most bankable stars was laid out for all to see.
These stories were being perpetrated and amplified by other big entertainment media conglomerates. But it was somebody who understood where were the low-hanging fruit in terms of the names that would resonate, that would give this story more legs, that would go viral.
The most annoying to me is there were a few people who were saying, like, oh, the studio's paralyzed. But the work was getting done. Movies were being made. TV shows were being produced. I mean, the world was continuing to move. It's because we figured out a way to get around it. I mean, there was a community that came out of this which really forged a very strong bond.
Because of the nature of the Hollywood connection and the celebrity angle, it quickly became a gossipy story about Hollywood power brokers. And here's the way they behave when they think no one's watching. And I worry that that gave cover to Washington, to holding the North Koreans responsible for this.
I don't think it was an act of war. I think it was an act of cyber vandalism that was very costly, very expensive.
The days of thinking that you have your information safe are over. And I remember talking to a government official at this conference once, and he said there were two types of people in the world. Those who have been hacked, and those who don't know they're being hacked. Once that happens, you're kind of scarred. You know, you've got PTSD on that. So it's like, from that moment forward, everything changes.
Sony employees still deal with fallout of the 2014 North Korean cyber invasion. It was a pivotal point in their lives. It also was a pivotal point in the North's long history of criminal enterprise.
They're very crafty at doing this sort of stuff because they have at least, 40, if not 40 plus years of honing their skills at this. And they keep adding on, such as with the cyber capability. And also now that we have cryptocurrencies and Bitcoin and things like that, these are new markets for them to get involved in that are basically the Wild West of financing out there. And the North Koreans can hide a lot of their illicit activities in these things because they are not monitored like the banking system is. And it can allow them to continue to evade the game of whack-a-mole.
From the very beginning, Kim Jong-un was always characterizing himself as a savvy military strategist who uses computers as part of that strategy. We should look at that as a clue for how they're going to use and how they do use computers and computer technology as a form of asymmetrical warfare.
Asymmetric warfare is essentially balancing your weakness as a country against other countries' strengths. For North Korea, the ballistic missile program is one example. And the same thing goes with cyber operation. It's a relatively low cost, right? Low threshold, high impact strategy. That's sort of the essence of asymmetric strategy and asymmetric warfare.
Their cyber operation, like all Kim's demands, are performed with lockstep precision.
Although there are a variety of organizations that have cyber capability within North Korea, the one that really seems to be most engaged in the economic element is the Reconnaissance General Bureau.
The Reconnaissance General Bureau, RGB, is a unique intelligence organization.
The RGB is really an intelligence and special operations organization. It is spies. It is people that conduct special operations, subversion, sabotage, and from that, they have developed within that their cyber capabilities.
The RGB is one of the reasons that North Korea has remained a pariah on the world stage.
And one of the amazing things that the North Koreans have been able to do, and one of the real ways they've been able to punch above their weight, is to make people think that they matter. I mean, really, North Korea should be Laos with nuclear weapons. But instead, it's something that we're doing a show on, and it gets so much, just an unbelievable amount of attention. And that's I mean, I feel bad saying this, but you got to give them credit for that. I mean, they have done an excellent job of remaining relevant in Washington all these decades.
Kim Jong-un began the expansion of organized hacking troops outside his borders.
They are groomed to be able to conduct cyber activities for the military or for the Reconnaissance General Bureau. It's just like whether you're an athlete, the communist countries who will identify children for the Olympics, and groom them their entire career. They do that for cyber, for nuclear, and for the military to support the regime.
North Korea has a very distinct operational model. Most United States hackers live in the United States and work in the United States. Same with China. In North Korea, the majority of their hackers are sent abroad. Right? It's a risky operational model because in many cases, the countries that host the hackers don't realize that they're hosting them. They may not know these people are North Koreans. They certainly, in most cases, don't realize that these people are here to conduct criminal activities, right, or attacks on other countries from their soil. It's an operational model that they had to adopt because for a long time, North Korea only had one pathway to the internet, one cable that connected the entire country to the rest of the global internet.
The persistence and creativity of the North Korean cyber crooks played out when they posed as potential employers using LinkedIn to find prospective employees from the Chilean banking system.
People from the North would make contact with them, actually have Skype interviews with them, and then they would send them an email with an application to fill out for employment in this new company. And so the employee would open the file and download the application and proceed to fill it out. And they would do this on their business computer, on their workstation, which of course had malware. It was an executable file, and that would penetrate the Chilean servers and allowed North Korea access to steal money.
Ultimately, they funneled $10 million out of Chile's second largest bank to accounts in Hong Kong. It could take threat specialists years to trace a cyber attack. And even then, the money is difficult to follow.
People have numbers about how much money is generated from the suite of North Korean cyber operations, but they're inevitably wrong. We only know what operations we catch, right? So that's first. We catch maybe 50%, I think, if we're lucky. Most banks don't want to admit they've been victimized by North Korea. They don't ever disclose how much money was stolen. The second set of unknowns comes from that physical virtual network, where North Korea, it takes money to bribe people and to move money into shady and criminal places through organizations, through casinos, right, so that it becomes untraceable.
The UN estimates that the North has generated $2 billion from banks and cryptocurrency exchanges that was directed into their weapons of mass destruction campaign.
They can conduct all the cyber operations they want and have digital currency and money in virtual bank accounts, right, in the SWIFT system in the Philippines Bank. But at some point, North Korea needs to move that money from the virtual world to the physical to buy the actual goods they need, right? The coal and the supplies for the missiles and the army and the rice for the people. And that's the point that we have the sort of least amount of knowledge, right? Where is the money from these operations going, right? And where can we interdict it?
One attack that tracked North Korea was on the ATM system of India's Cosmos Bank.
The Cosmos attack was the first time that North Korea had used the ATM network and the systems that validate the transactions. They upped the amount of money that each account that they wanted to exploit could withdraw from an ATM without really the system realizing that. And then they sent out people with fraudulent cards linked to all of those accounts to go to the ATMs and withdraw that maximum amount of money and then take it somewhere.
The Cosmos Bank hackers siphoned off $13.5 million across 28 countries over one weekend. Nearly 15,000 transactions in just over 2 hours with fraudulent customer information. Then, in May of 2017, a ransomware attack spread throughout the globe, 150 nations in all. WannaCry 2.0 is now synonymous with one of the world's most notorious cyber attacks.
For WannaCry, a ransom note would have flashed on your screen. It would say something along the lines of, your files have been encrypted. We can decrypt them for you, but you need to pay X number of Bitcoin in this wallet, and we will confirm.
Windows-based computers in the U.S. and across the globe could be at risk in what some experts have called a cyber apocalypse.
WannaCry was among a stockpile of cyber weapons stolen from the U.S. National Security Agency, released by a group of hackers known as the Shadow Brokers. It crippled Britain's National Health Service, FedEx, Germany's National Railway, and countless more across the globe.
One of the reasons why WannaCry, though, was so much more prolific than typical ransomware is that the North Koreans built in or engineered this new version to include an exploit. And this particular exploit, right, allowed this piece of malware to propagate automatically, right, because it scanned computer networks looking for specific services. And if the network had that, it would then infect that network and that computer. And so it self-propagated, and that's what made it so disruptive and so difficult at first to shut off.
Marcus Hutchins, a British cybersecurity specialist, discovered a kill switch embedded in the malware, stopping the spread after days of global panic.
Cyber is proven to be a very practical tool on many levels because Kim Jong-un can use cyber, as he's done, to steal money, steal Bitcoin. He can use it to attack infrastructure. He can use it to extort money, using malware and holding companies at risk. He can use it for espionage, and he can use it for influence. So cyber is a very, very important tool. And I think Kim Jong-un has recognized this.
Cyber threat is a constant part of the world we live in. Individuals, infrastructure, corporations, and governments are not immune. In 2014, it was Sony. 2 years later, the US elections were allegedly manipulated by a disinformation campaign by Russian cybercriminals. In 2020, bad actors like North Korea continue to pay little for cyber theft, destruction, or extortion. According to an FBI indictment, North Korean hacker Park Jin-yak, known to operate out of Dalian, China, masterminded the WannaCry attack and the Sony invasion. An arrest is highly unlikely.
I think the fact that we're talking about it now 5 years later is a good thing to remind people that this is a real and present danger.
So I think they are behaving like criminals because that is their strategy for survival and keeping the Kim family in power.
They do have a potential to wreak a lot of havoc on the international financial community. You wouldn't know where the attacks are coming from. I think they have some things in their back pocket that they can unleash, and I think we know that, or suspect that they do.
He's trying to convey the image to his people and to the outside world that he's very normal, but he is not. And the kind of deception that they are engaging in is dangerous if we buy it.